Morning, everyone. Welcome to Avero's live stream this week. It's a really exciting topic about AI and ethics in the public sector. And where do you go to ask questions about AI and ethics? Um, we have a really special guest today, but before we begin, I want to tell you that we go live every Wednesday. We have a variety of topics, a variety of guests. And as an independent third-party consulting firm, we take our job of bringing best practices and the latest news from the industry to our audience every week. And so you can find us on YouTube, on all the social channels. Please subscribe to our channels so you can take advantage of all of this wonderful content we provide. But before we go on, I want to introduce my panel today. Clay Brooks is a senior consultant with Avero, very deep into all things AI. Clay, you want to give us a little blurb about you?
Sure. I'm Clay, and yes, I have a very special interest in the artificial intelligence and machine learning thing going on lately with local government. And I wanted to talk with Tom today. I was really pushing to get Tom onto this live stream because I just wanted to hear you two talk. And of course, I also have a lot of questions. My background is in anthropology, so I studied humans, and I figured they would always be around. But now with AI rising, maybe I was wrong. So with that, I do want to introduce Tom Gilbert.
Hey, Tom, tell
Thanks.
us about you.
Thanks, guys. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to join. I am the CEO of Hortus AI, and Hortus is really building what I like to call the consumer reports for AI adoption, starting with the public sector. So we really want to create a one-stop shop for different products to be listed, to be compared, to be ranked in ways that are helpful for the public interest. However, that is defined on different use cases. I, as Clay alluded to, have a somewhat unique background. I have, to my knowledge, one of the world's first doctorates in AI ethics, which I designed when I was at UC Berkeley in the mid 2010s. But prior to that, my background was in sociology, history, political theory, philosophy. And so I really, for me, what that meant, and I'm happy we can explore this. For me, it was really about bringing a humanist lens to what often may end up being an anti-humanist, or a technology that often doesn't succeed at prioritizing human values and concerns. So it was a very unique journey for me that I'm still on in terms of what my company is now doing.
That is pretty amazing. So, UC Berkeley, I mean, it's the hotbed of startup action and technologists and great companies coming out of that region in general. And you decided to go down the humanist path, which
Mhm.
I think, is going to be the most critical path as we take on this new industrial revolution. And every conversation we have is around what jobs are going to survive and who's going to do what and how much is AI going to do. So it's really important to have that framework of, what is AI, ethics in AI, one, and two, how far do we take it? Do we have control? And is it when is it going to go from really cool to really dangerous, and who's going to
Mhm.
gatekeep, right? There's several theories around in this space about what's going to happen next. And you have a PhD in this. So tell me this, how did you, to get a PhD, you have to work really hard for a long time. And for most people, like 99.9% of the world, AI is new. It's 2 years old when GPT was first released. The
Yeah.
more advanced people, maybe Jasper, right? If you remember that. So when did you start going down this path, and why?
It's an interesting story, and it's very deeply tied to my personal background and my biography. I actually grew up in the country, specifically Appalachian, Ohio. I grew up on a sheep farm, and when I wasn't taking care of animals, I was reading a lot. I had a lot of unstructured time, and I was into sci-fi. I read a lot of classic sci-fi books. I read the whole Dune series. I read Robert Heinlein and a lot of these classic authors. And I read a lot about AI. This was old school AI. This was,
Hmm.
someday will there be Terminator type stuff, and
Yeah.
there were these theories of the singularity that were very popular,
Oh my
kind
goodness.
of
I
coming out
remember
of
the
the,
singularity.
mid to late 90s. There was a particular, so Ray Kurzweil's writings were, I remember reading the singularity stuff when I was like 12 years old, and just my mind just completely opening up around, you see these exponential graphs of like discovery of fire, invention of the printing press, superhuman computers that are smarter than all the people across the world. And so I think what was most fascinating for me was how we were about to head into an exponential time, and how challenging it was to approach that responsibly. How can you be responsible? How can you actually be committed to anything? How can you stand by your values and protect what's
Hmm.
most important when the world is literally changing faster than you are able to understand? And it sounds strange, but yeah, even I think that seed was planted in my mind even before my adolescence, just because of some books that I happened
Hmm.
to read. So you fast forward like 15 years, I was on the West Coast. I was in a PhD program in sociology, actually, at the time. So I have an MA in sociology. But this was like 2015. Everybody had a smartphone. Everybody was talking on campus about, when are self-driving cars going to be here? Probably very soon. Everybody's using the latest apps, half of which were built on that campus. And suddenly, and this is the more technical side of things, computer vision, machine learning, reinforcement learning were suddenly starting to work. General purpose
Yeah.
algorithms were no longer just an idea, they were becoming real. And that kind of reawakened this side of me of like, I think this is the threshold. I think actually this is the moment when this idea of an exponential curve becomes a reality. And yeah, it was that inkling was powerful enough for me that I pivoted into designing a PhD from scratch. There was not a PhD program in AI ethics, and I basically had to personally petition the university itself and create an independent department in which my PhD was based. So my formal degree, I think I named it machine ethics and epistemology. That was the best I could do. Basically, that's just a fancy way of saying, how do you make AI do things that are good? And how do you know that it's going to do the things that are good? And so the committee I designed, the faculty was comprised of, there was a philosopher on it, there was a legal scholar, there was a computer scientist, there was also a roboticist, and there was also a social scientist too. And so I really drew, I kind of had this team of rivals idea of like all the different fields and disciplines you would need to really try and approach this. And so I guess that was my answer to my question for myself. How do you act responsibly in an exponential time? And the answer is you try and become a leader, and you organize these new conversations at the intersection of different ways of thinking, and have the courage to embrace that uncertainty and then try things out, experiment. And so I spent the next 5, 6 years experimenting at the boundaries of different fields.
You got a bunch of people in the same room that you knew would have differing opinions about something, and then you made them talk it out so that you could find the like sort of was it the truth that you were looking for, or was it something else?
There's a good phrase that philosophers I think like to say to themselves, which is you've hit on some, you've made progress in philosophy when you stumble on questions that are hard to answer.
So
So
you
it
were
wasn't.
looking for the hard questions, not the answers themselves, perhaps.
I would say most of the work was about finding ways to articulate new questions that
Mm.
none of those fields I just named could answer, and then that set an agenda. So a
At
lot of
least
what I
not on
was
their
doing,
own, right?
certainly not on the, well, no, it was an intensely collaborative process, but a lot of what I was doing was mediating these different these different gestalts, these different frameworks, and different literatures. It was a matter of I had to read both very widely and very deeply, and then ultimately what it came down to was storytelling. So my thesis ended up actually, in some ways, I think reading almost more like a like a novel in a sense, because I had to come up with protagonists and conflicts and things that were beyond what any of those canonical disciplines were most comfortable with. And
I
that
wanted to
is
have
that
you on here because your company and your vision align really well with Avero's vision for the human side of AI. And I just really appreciate you talking about all of this. And I want to know, before I forget what you were saying and what I was going to say, who do you think right now the characters in your thesis novel are? Because I know you've written a new thesis recently. So who's the protagonist? Who's the villain? What's going on right now in your mind?
Yes. So at a high level, basically what I said in the thesis was, and this was still when self-driving cars were often the dominant metaphor for thinking about AI. I think that may have shifted now to chatbots or things like ChatGPT, but
Well,
at the time it still
self-driving
was.
cars are still kind of a big deal.
They're absolutely a huge deal, but yeah, there was this rhetoric at the time of, when we're thinking about the ethics of a self-driving car, a lot of the question was, well, how would you make it so that the self-driving car made the right ethical decision if it's faced with some kind of dilemma? So this is a famous thought experiment called the trolley problem. The argument
Oh
there
God.
basically was, oh, is it better or worse for it to kill only one person instead of more, if it's heading towards some kind of decision point, or is it
Mhm.
better to just let it do what it would do naturally in a more controllable and efficient, but then possibly more harmful way? Now, that was in a sense the protagonist that was the story I was fighting against. This is sort of the way the literature spoke, is
Right.
that this is the way in which it's appropriate or natural to think about the ethics of a machine.
To
And
think
what I
about
was
programming ethics into a
Yeah.
machine. Yeah.
When really what the story I ended up telling in the thesis was in some ways the opposite of that, which is it's much more appropriate and frankly accurate to think about these technologies not as agents that have their own ethics that we put into them, but rather as extremely powerful tools or capabilities that allow us to be ethical in new ways.
Mm.
They invite and they make possible decisions about how we organize cities, roads, infrastructure, you name it, that were not previously possible because we simply did not have the capabilities to make those decisions. So, for example, what we're now seeing with automated vehicle fleets is that if you have enough of these things on the road, and it's really not very many, maybe just 5% of cars, once 5% of cars are automated, it is possible for the company that controls those cars to control traffic across cities, across conceivably states, entire sections of road networks. Now, that's very concerning, but it's also an enormous opportunity for public planners, citizen groups, advocates to decide what they want roads to feel like at scale. And that
Okay.
was not
So
easily, yeah, I'll pause there, please.
yeah, I just want to make sure that anybody who's just now joining understands where we have gotten because it's already kind of been a journey. So you were talking about how you got your PhD in machine ethics, and you were talking about your thesis and how at the time there was a conversation about artificial intelligence and machine learning that focused around programming ethics into machines, right? Making self-driving cars work the way that we ethically believe that they should, or something like that. But now that you're talking about what you're currently talking about with your company and with what I'm bringing you onto this program here for, is there are new characters in your novel of a thesis not just the cars themselves, right? But the company or organization or group of people who are responsible for the fleet of vehicles, for the how, like deciding how we want to make the roads feel, deciding how we want to make the overall system of AI agents that will soon form a large part of local government run, how we want them to run. So is that, am I on the right track here of as to like how you got to the Hortus concept and who the characters are in the story now in 2025?
Yeah, that's very well said. So I'll just even distill the way you were just throwing that back at me. So the story of my journey into the field of AI ethics was changing the narrative away from the ethics of models to the ethics of systems. And what that means is, instead of just thinking of ethics as a way to accurately represent some decision at some static point in time that some hypothetical entity might make, whether it's a machine or a human, instead you think about what is the behavior that we want once there's this new kind of infrastructure, this new type of technology powering life, powering cities, powering roads, powering energy, powering the internet, right? It's a new horizon of decision making that actually it's awesome to embrace, and so it really asks us to be more ethical than we were able to be before, because we didn't have that horizon at hand. We weren't able to decide at scale how we wanted roads to function or feel. We were not previously able to decide how we want energy infrastructure to be optimized at the level of an entire nation. We were not previously able to decide how to double or triple our productivity of a small business or of a municipality, now that you can effectively hire out dozens of artificial agents to do all sorts of tasks that previously were things you either had to do manually or just not do. The story of the public sector for the last 100 years has really been, frankly, that there's always been more that needed to be done than could be done for the public. And I think the story that we need to tell right now, and I think the ethical calling here is, now that we have a technology that is on the cusp of actually making feasible all of these priorities by which we could serve the public, how can we actually then achieve it? How can we actually serve the public better and in the way that fits that mandate for the first time? Whereas previously we had to, cut this Gordian knot of like robbing Paul to pay Peter in terms of what cities or states are faced with.
And now, whose responsibility is it? And who owns the outcomes? Who's going to be accountable for how things end up, right? And you mentioned all of these bigger ways that AI could transform the way we think about our municipalities and even our countries at large in the world. And I see a question from Megan, and I don't know how to pull it up on the screen, but she asks, where do you see the most immediate wins for AI in local government on an operational citizen engagement or policy level? What are some of the good things you believe could happen?
Well, I think the answer is that we can serve the public better. So it's one thing for teams or individual people to just, for example, play with ChatGPT because you're bored, or you want to see how many memes it can generate, or you want to, put a picture of you on some kind of video that you like or whatever. That's all fun and games, but it's another thing to ask, how can tools like this actually get, for example, local government to work, not just in the ways that citizens are accustomed to, but in ways that actually affirm what constituents want, right? How can we actually do right by citizens? And that's my answer to the question of, how should local government use AI? Well, they should use it if they think they can actually serve the public better in the way that they use it. New companies, okay, still startups in Silicon Valley. OpenAI is still basically a startup, even though it's a giant multi-billion-dollar enterprise at this point. It's run like a startup, and what that means is it has this kind of Willy Wonka mandate. Okay, every few months it rolls out an everlasting gobstopper, or it rolls out some new fancy reasoning model or something like that. That's powerful, but it needs to be given oversight. It needs to be held accountable in the way that, in this case, public sector teams or public interest advocates have enough of an understanding of that new kind of power that they are able to then integrate it into their own mandates and their own goals to serve their constituents or stakeholders better. It's almost, and this is again the system level frame that we were talking about earlier, it's almost like a metabolic process. It's like a digestive system. And the problem right now is that we're kind of getting these new kinds of nutrients shoved down our throats, but we haven't yet developed the organs and the metabolism needed to really digest it and really make use of it in the ways that we could if we had that ability. And so that does feed into the vision for what Hortus, my company, is doing. What we were basically doing is, we're not creating additional AI models or agents or chat. There's enough. We think there's enough of those things. What we're building is that infrastructure to make it so that public sector teams, nonprofits, small businesses, basically any group trying to do right by the public interest is able to compare, assess, and select the right AI tools for use cases that matter to them, tools that actually solve their problems. It's kind of like the digestive tract for public interest AI is how I would describe it.
What you've been building recently, and I know it's going to make your eyes light up, so I want to give you a chance to talk about it. We met through the GovAI Coalition, and we have been on the industry relations committee together. And you currently have a project going on that is going to move forward these ideals that your company holds in a more tangible way. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we are building, as you mentioned, in partnership with the GovAI Coalition, we are building a marketplace to basically act as this clearinghouse. The idea is that up and coming AI vendors, which could be startups, they could be more established companies that are building new tools or refining new tools, who want to market their products on new kinds of use cases, new kinds of verticals that the public sector and local government and public interest groups would find value in. It's an opportunity for them to list their products in ways that are transparent, accountable, and trustworthy. So the way these are kind of classic values in the ethics of AI space, right? How do we make AI more transparent? How do we make it explainable? How do we make it something that you know how it works? Well, frankly, the tricky thing is that if you just try and make each model or each tool more transparent, you often get, these are often like black boxes in the sense that basically often they're trained on as much data as the company can get its hands on, filtered through as much compute as the company can get its hands on. So it's really just a data sponge. There's often not a lot of structure to it. So that does pose this conundrum, which is how can you make something more transparent if the way it's been engineered is almost more like a Rube Goldberg kind of machine that does interesting things, but it's really hard to pinpoint exactly why or how. Now, the way we're managing that and solving that at scale is by not just trying to, go into the guts of every model and trying to provide guarantees that have these open-ended questions on them. Instead, what we're doing is creating an ecosystem for vendors to more completely document the decisions they've made when they have engineered these models. What spec did they write for it? What was it optimizing for? What was the data on which it was trained? What are its intended use cases? What tests have they performed? What known limits are there on its performance? And the beauty of this is the more forthright vendors can be about those things, the more competitive they'll be on the marketplace. So what we've done internally, and we are creating our own ranking algorithms and infrastructure that make it so that we assess these tools based on not just abstract measures of performance, but on criteria for forthrightness in the documentation. And so vendors that are more reliable in what they say, that are more verifiable in how they communicate these results, and the other commitments they can demonstrate to their ability to stand behind their products, that puts them in front of these folks that we're partnering with. So they're going to be the first ones listed for every use case if they're able to meet those criteria. So the beauty is transparency, accountability, explainability. They're not just technical features of models, they're incentives of the ecosystem of how AI is brought to market and the way in which these new kinds of solutions can be matched to public problems. That's the ecosystem we're creating, and it's a win-win-win condition, I think, both for the vendors, but then also for these public interest constituents and public sector teams.
So, Tom,
Wow.
I think I'm back. Can you guys hear me, see me? This is the
Yeah,
real me.
it seems
Okay.
like it. And I saw a
Yeah.
question on your face as well. What's going on? What's on your mind?
Yeah, plenty. One is, this ecosystem you're building, I really appreciate it because not just in AI, you need that kind of accountability across the board in software. What are you building, especially in SaaS? Because once you get a SaaS contract for 7, 10 years, you are beholden to any company that's serving you, right? They all mean well, but at the end of the day, there's a profit motive that doesn't, the incentives don't match either side because our clients don't have a profit motive. They have a service motive. And with AI, it gets even deeper because the problem we try to solve as consultants is translating what the client needs are into what software is doing and helping our clients understand what's going on and why they need to spend this kind of money or what's right, what's wrong. And with AI, that problem is 1,000-fold, if not more, pronounced. So, two questions. One is when you talk about bringing accountability to AI practices within software, I mean, within government, right? You can talk about large ERP systems or just a one-off chatbot that someone's trying to sell you. One is the marketing around it, right? Storytelling, as you mentioned, is critical. And I think there's a lot of stories being told today that are sci-fi-ish and not real, but they're being sold as being real. Huge problem. And then the second problem, I think, is how do you get people to give you uh, that data? What makes a large software company give you that kind of data? And how do you also keep up with it? By the time you synthesize what they gave you last month, it may be too old. So talk to me about how you're handling these problems.
Yeah, these are serious. These are the serious questions of the landscape, and they're the major tectonic features of the AI ethics landscape that we've been discussing. I would even tie it back. I mean, what I was saying at the start. How do you be responsible in an exponential time? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so to dig underneath what you were saying, right? There is this risk of vendor lock-in, for example,
Yeah.
right? Where you've got these multi-year contracts and agreements between a private sector company and a public sector entity. And in a sense, there's clear mutual benefit to both sides because the one has a mandate, as you said, of service, and that service
Mm-hmm.
could be met through the use of this tool, whatever it may be. And on the other hand, the contract has some monetary value, and so the vendor is getting something out of it too. However, OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepMind, every 2 weeks they put a fresh coat of paint on their
Mm-hmm.
models. They're rolling out new functionalities, new use cases, new capabilities, literally as fast, in some cases, as it is physically possible to do so.
Mm-hmm.
The data centers that are popping up across the country and around the world, energy grids are now buckling under the strain of this, you know. And so I think what this tells us is, and in a way I'm channeling the lesson I took from designing this PhD and assembling that interdisciplinary committee I mentioned at the start. There's a new horizon of what contracting is going to mean when it comes to onboarding AI capabilities. We are going to see, and there are lots of examples of this, but I'll just say for now at a high level, AI contracting with the public sector is going to depend on criteria beyond just the financial bottom line. That's not because the financial bottom line doesn't matter. It just means that even in order for that bottom line to be trusted and for vendor lock-in to be mitigated, other criteria are just also in the room. Environmental sustainability, for example. Is it actually feasible for my county or my state to partner with this vendor for multiple years when 5 years from now, they may be eating up 3 times as many data centers or 3 times as much energy as they are when the contract is signed. It could also be 30 times, depending on however far along the technology is moving by that point or not, right? So that is an additional criteria. Another additional criteria is something like public trust. So it's one thing.
I was about to say, that's what it sounds like you were getting into.
It's one thing if a public sector team or department wants, for example, to procure a chatbot for internal use because they at least have been told in terms of the marketing, if not believe, that it will increase their productivity, by 50% year over year. Fine, that's all fine and good. What relationship, if any, will the public have with that tool, or how will that tool transform those teams in ways that affect its relationship with citizens, with residents? So, we've worked one-on-one with cities and counties where this is actually the major question. They're like, we have this big contract with a big tech vendor. We're happy with it, but we don't understand how once we shift the public websites for our city over to something AI enabled, is that something that, are we just going to see retention drop, through the tubes, or are people going to be using it differently? It turns out if you hook in a chatbot to a public website and it's just meant to answer questions like, when will your trash get picked up, or where can you register to vote? The third thing people ask it is, should I divorce my wife? Should I move to Spain?
That's so true.
Should I learn to cook, banh mi or something like that, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, but that's, again, this human element of when you give people this newfangled device that they no longer feel embarrassed to ask it anything they want, they'll ask it anything that comes to mind. And that then requires a different kind of guardrail. It requires a different kind of relationship with these constituents. And ultimately, this is going to factor into, I think, the way these contracts are drafted and structured and agreed upon, which is, what additional assurances can you make for the ways in which people may want to interact with these things or expect them to work beyond whatever you're literally promising in terms of its technical spec, right? That stuff just is there, and there's only so much longer. I mean, you can't avoid that elephant in the room anymore.
Right. And there's a big difference between the kind of expectations people have for a private company or entity and the kind of expectations that citizens have for their governments.
100%. Yes. So it's one thing. This is sort of the more human-centered design aspect of it. It's one thing for me or for you to, as a consumer, use ChatGPT to, as I did a couple weeks after it came out, write a Christmas letter, or at least a first draft of it that I'd then sent off to friends and family, because I decided 2022 was the last year when that would be like a cute thing to do. It's another thing if, as a citizen, I am basically compelled or forced to interact with a ChatGPT wrapper that's been deployed on my city's websites, right?
To do something
It,
that I would normally do by talking to a human, like asking when my trash is going to get picked up or asking if I should move to Spain.
there's a different relationship there that people expect or want to have with their own representatives and their own public services than they want. And this is a much larger conversation, which is sort of like, does it actually make sense? Can AI just make the government work as well or as efficiently as the private sector? I have a lot of thoughts on that, and it's beyond the scope of this conversation. But I'll just emphasize again, the ethical question here is there are different values at stake in public services than in private goods and services. And the reason we know that is because people interact with them differently. If you put the same chatbot on top of these different websites, people do not prompt them in the same way. They do not interact with them in the same way, and they are satisfied with them differently. And we have data showing this. And that, again, that's a new opportunity for us to rethink what public service means, because it needs to be something more or different than just a chatbot that's been trained on public sector data. That is not what it means. And that is not what people want, actually. It means something else. And Hortus is in the business of figuring out what that means and creating the infrastructure to support it.
That's why I think that I wanted to have you on, because your company's values and our company's values are just so well aligned. And Megan brings it up that it's important to have people who are informed and who they take the time to think about this stuff. It's important to have people on your side and in your corner that are there to represent you in the interests of your constituents and not just the interests of these major software companies that are acting like startups, right? So that's where we would fit into the equation as Avero advisors. So like both of our companies are trying to do stuff that really enhances how AI can serve the public good. And I just wanted to, thank you for thinking about all this. And I don't think that is outside the scope of the conversation personally. And like I said, I want to hear what makes your eyes light up lately, because this is your job, is to think about this stuff. And our job is to let people who dedicate a lot of their time to thinking about this kind of stuff, just like speak their minds and make a difference, and not just sell their product, but also have a conversation, like start a back and forth between governments and companies and consulting firms and marketplaces of ideas and ratings. So yeah, what do you think is going on with the difference between a private company and a government entity? And do you think that the goal should be to make a government function as well or as efficiently as a private company would, given that they have different goals in mind? Do they have different goals?
It's an ambitious question. I think in some ways it's the question of our time. It transcends AI, but AI is at the epicenter of this question of really what is the place of the public sector if the private sector is now rolling out technologies that are at least often marketed and promised to automate, and frankly often what that means is remove a lot of the infrastructure that has existed in the public sector, again, for something like 100 years or more. I'll just briefly point out what I think one critical dimension of the difference is. I do think government should be efficient. I mean, every system should be as efficient as it can be, because again, that's just this kind of metabolic, digestive, are your organs working as intended or not, right? But I think another value that's missing from that conversation, and that's critical, is not just efficiency, but abundance. So actually, there's this recent book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson that came out, I think, called Abundance. And it's a very provocative book. It's not really about AI. It's more about what a possible vision is for the future of the public sector over the next couple decades, let's say, till 2050. And I think the key thesis of their book, and this book just came out, I would encourage folks to take a look at it. It's a very provocative read. Their argument is that the purpose of government is really not ultimately to be efficient. The purpose of government, and I think what they mean, especially today, the purpose of government is to remove artificial forms of scarcity that inhibit flourishing and growth and the kind of life that most people want to live. That there are many scarcities with respect to, and it could be housing, it could be nutrition, it could be clean energy, it could be, any number of other services that we want there to be public service supporting, that are artificially constrained because of the fact that government has only ever worked in one way. And what AI allows, I think, really now on a week by week basis, is rethinking those boundaries and expanding that horizon of what we could make abundant if we wanted to. The number of material resources available, the capacity for millions of people to solicit online services that previously would have taken months or weeks, or frankly, sometimes years to have access to, could now in principle be delivered in a matter of minutes. There's no reason anymore, technically, why the public sector could not provide that. It's a remarkable moment that we're living in. Then the question is, how can we enable or supercharge that abundance? How can we remove those forms of scarcity now that we have the tools to do so? That's not a conversation about efficiency alone. It's a conversation about what we want from government now that AI makes it possible.
And about what risks there might be involved in implementing that level of abundance that maybe not everyone thinks about at first, which is why we have experts, which is why we have panels, right? But I really think that that's a beautiful sentiment, and I'm really glad that you shared that. What do you think about that, Avery? If you're there still, I know you've been having
I'm here. I'm
technical
back.
issues.
I wish AI
Awesome.
would solve the internet and power issues at the hotel. I'm calling in from Portland, Oregon. Um, it's interesting. Is government supposed to be efficient? Is kind of blowing my mind right now because that's the business we've always been in. It's trying to make government efficient through the enterprise software or business process redesign. And it's such a pivotal moment because we go into clients and we spend time doing current state analysis. What's working, what's not working. Let's map your process. Let's find the inefficiencies. And lately it's been, why bother? Because let's take you to the future state. What does that look like? And there's a lot of resistance from the line users, right? The leadership may be very gung-ho about AI and its use for their operations, but the everyday worker that is issuing permits or helping you, pay some kind of tax, they just want to do their jobs. And so the question about how can we make you more efficient is now really challenging because we're starting to say, forget becoming efficient. Let's redo. Let's blow this thing up and let's go to the future because here's all the tools that are available. And it is a Wild West moment because to most people, AI is ChatGPT. To most people, AI is a chatbot. And couple that with the marketing efforts from big and small software companies that are saying we have AI-enabled ERPs. What does that even mean? Because a lot of them can't show you. And even if they have AI-enabled ERPs, there's nothing to show. The product still looks the same. But the promise is in the background, we have, we're going to multiply your workforce by 10,000 by using agents and AI-enabled agentic so-and-so. So to the everyday user, that doesn't mean anything because they just want to do their job. And I think we're in this flux moment where more more talks about this and educating that level of government worker is going to be really important, because it's going to come down to adoption. And the old joke is, when consultants show up, it's like, what's going to happen to my job? It's like Office Space. What do you think? What would you say you do here? I'm a people person. And that is going to be the critical skill going forward. But it's a slow burn. And the differentiation to me between private and public sector traditionally was, public sector can watch and learn what didn't work in the private sector. So many failure stories, right? And then you can leapfrog technologies. I think this is a moment where um, the more risk-taking government organizations can actually be on the forefront and not wait to see what works and doesn't work. In fact, they may not have the luxury of doing so. And we feel that too, as a private organization. We need to be innovative in our methodologies and how we deliver services to our clients. We may not be a product firm, but the services we offer need to evolve with the times. So Wild West is, I think, the theme, and I think you're doing noble work by sort of shining the light in the corners that need light shined on.
I would like to also bring up the whole point. Now that we're a couple of minutes before probably the end of this, there's leadership that is gung-ho about AI. Yeah, there are workers on the front line who are worried about what's going to happen to their job, who are worried about what if the AI misses this one little thing and there's a domino effect and everything just like falls apart. But then there's the citizens. What do they actually want? What do they actually need? And how can private sector and public sector organizations somehow be in this conversation and invite citizenry into the conversation as well? Because I'm sure that you or I or the government, anybody who works in the government, could ideate all day about what people need, what people want, what people would benefit from. But sometimes there is a theory, there's a philosophy that you should just ask the people what they need and what they want. So I just wanted to make sure that that voice was not silent in this conversation, because it's important, I think, for us as consultants and as people who build platforms and systems for making these kinds of decisions. It's important for us to consider that element in these conversations.
I think the citizens, we're all citizens, right?
Right.
All
in
we
the
want
end,
is I want my trash picked up. I want public safety. I want good education.
and I
And
want to
then
be
leave me
able
alone.
to change what day my garbage gets picked up by logging onto a website and selecting an option, rather than having to dig through a phone tree to talk to a person and then not even get an email saying that it got updated.
Yeah.
What is
That's
the
what I mean.
actual end goal? Yeah. What are the questions we need to ask?
And this goes back to a conversation about DAOs, right? Digitally autonomous organizations. That's the promise, is of this whole thing, AI and blockchain. How can we make this foolproof to the point where it just works? And I just want it to work. And that's me as a citizen saying, it's too complicated for good and bad reasons. And now is the time to think about, how do we really untangle this ball of yarn?
I think it's also
I
about
think that's a
self-determining,
conversation.
as Clay was saying. I mean, to return to the Wild West metaphor is operative here, right? So
Yeah.
if you're living in the Wild West and you think about what was AI, you can imagine like some kind of snake oil salesman coming to your house and saying, okay, here's a shotgun. This shotgun's really good. It's very accurate. And if anybody gets too close to your farm, you can just shoot them dead, right? But really, the way we got out of the Wild West eventually was we needed a sheriff. Like there needed to be people who were responsible to, in a certain county or city or whatever, who were able to create rules that people wanted for how their lives could work, and then could enforce them. That's really, I think, what we need to be seeing from the infrastructure behind AI right now. And I think we are getting there, but I think that it is quite a journey. And unfortunately, these tools are often marketed in ways more towards the former story than this latter one. But I have hope that will shift.
Well, in the US, right, it is, if you look at what they allow in Europe, I don't think they have the latest models of OpenAI available to them because of regulation. So there is a point to be made about innovation and what that does to industry by holding it back, by not letting it have the ability to use the latest models. But again, it's philosophical. These debates are ongoing across the world. And it's just cool to be in this spot as a human being, as people who have studied humans. This is such a cool moment in time. So let's talk about the opportunity available. And I'm really passionate about talking to people that are just coming out of college, thinking about, oh, I want to go get a master's degree in something. And I've always maintained that you better ask yourself why you want that. Do you want a piece of paper, or do you want to learn something? If you want to learn something, there's no better time in history to just go on YouTube or our channels and learn something new. And it's just opening up so much opportunity. Let's dig into that a little bit before we wrap up. What do you think of that, Tom? Is it am I over am I making this a little too dramatic for how cool of a time it is to be a human?
I think it's one of the most stimulating times to be a human that has ever existed. Certainly, I mean
Yeah,
the sheer wealth of information available. Then there's the risk of a lot of that information, being not very useful or being inaccurate, right? And so I think what it really means to learn today, if we're thinking about young people, you're learning how to distinguish the signal from the noise in every area of your life, whether that's dating, whether that's good code versus bad code, whether that's, this book versus that book, this podcast or that one. We're in a media saturated world now completely. AI is driving that exponentially as well. Now you should embrace the challenge, but embracing the challenge does mean that we find new criteria for what is worth trusting. There aren't just three television channels anymore. There isn't just Encyclopedia Britannica, and you can't just go to the local dance and meet your high school sweetheart and spend the next 60 years together. I mean, maybe you can. There are still maybe sometimes that happens, but that's mostly not the world that we live in anymore. And so people need to become, I think, more entrepreneurial in the way in which they find the information that speaks to them and that ends up being useful in their lives.
I
that's
agree.
great.
There's so many algorithms that want to decide for you what you consume nowadays. And that's part of this conversation. That's an element of this conversation. What do you actually want to seek out and to learn? And how do you do that? Rather than what does the algorithm think you want to learn? What does the algorithm want to feed you? It's what do you actually desire? What do you want to consume? What conversations do you want to be part of? So that's just what I've been hearing in my circles, which tend to involve creativity and agency in your life. And that's part of this conversation as well. Master's degrees, governments, and all.
Yeah. All right. I think we should wrap. We're over time, but Tom,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us and giving
Yes.
us
Thank you.
your time and knowledge. Uh, Again, this is Avero Advisors. We are live every week with a different topic. Next week, we'll be live from DC at the GFOA conference. If you're going, please come see us. We're at booth 630, I think. You can't miss it. It's the best booth in town. And we have cool swag. But again, thank you for joining us. We will be posting this on all of our channels, so go check it out. And Tom, where can people find you, contact you to talk about all of this?
So people are welcome to visit our website. There is a link there to our white paper, which does articulate and outline the vision in a distilled way of a lot of what I've been speaking about. And if there are any startups listening who might want to have their tools listed or get involved as early adopters of this marketplace, they can certainly reach out. There's a form which I'd be happy to send out in advance of this call by which they can sign up. And we're also, again, looking for more partners on the public side as well who would derive value from from using this consumer reports that we're building. So I'd be happy to share more of those resources.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. Thanks, Clay. And we'll see you next week.